That dog wouldn't let me jump in front of the bus, and I swear to you, he looked at me like he knew why I was there. It had been a Wednesday. Cold. The kind of cold that crept under your coat, even when the sun was out, and pretending to help. I was sitting in the kitchen, watching steam rise from my untouched coffee. The TV was on, playing a morning show I didn't care about. They were talking about spring sales, or the new strawberry donut craze. But all I could think about was how quiet the house was now. Too quiet. 3 weeks since the funeral, and still I was waking up expecting him to walk down those stairs, grumbling about how the news never told the truth and asking where his socks ran off to. Now there were no socks, no grumbling, just empty. I didn't have a plan when I walked out the door. I didn't bring my phone, no wallet. I wasn't even wearing the right shoes. I just knew I needed to move. I needed to get out of the house before the silence swallowed me whole. The bus stop on Red Maple Road wasn't anything special. One bench, one pole with the number 9 schedule on it, a patch of weeds trying to survive beside the cracked sidewalk. And that's where I saw him. Big dog. Probably 50, maybe 60 pounds. Thick coat, muddy beige and cream. Looked like a mix of husky and retriever. He was just sitting there, right on the concrete next to the bench. His ears perked up when he saw me, but he didn't bark or move, just stared, like he was waiting for someone. I didn't even think. I sat down beside him. Not close, but not far either. Enough to share a moment, if that makes sense. I hadn't been near another living thing since the day we buried my husband. And for some reason, that mutt felt more real than anything I'd touched in weeks. He sniffed the air. His head turned toward the street, and he stood up. Then he sat again. Then stood. Every time a car passed, he stiffened like he was expecting something. I said, "You waiting for somebody, boy?" He didn't answer, obviously, but he looked at me, right in the eyes, and not the way a normal dog looks at you. There was something behind it, something quiet and thoughtful. I hadn't intended to cry, but I did. I looked down at my knees, thinking maybe I'd just sit here until I got too cold, or until the bus came, or until I stopped caring. That's when I felt it. A paw, heavy and warm, right on my thigh. He didn't jump or nuzzle, just laid that big paw down like he was saying, "I'm here. Don't go." That was the moment something shifted. I still didn't know what I was going to do, but I wasn't going to do what I came there for. I stayed with him for an hour, maybe longer. A few people passed by. One jogger, a guy with headphones, a teenage boy who called him a cool dog, but didn't stop. Nobody seemed to think it was strange that a woman and a dog were camped out at the edge of Red Maple Road. Eventually, the bus came. Number 9. Blue and white. Doors opened with that tired hiss. The driver looked at me, then at the dog. "He yours?" he asked. I shook my head. "He's been sitting there for 3 days, the driver said. "Same spot, same time, won't move. Thought he was waiting for someone." I looked down at him. He was lying on his side now, tail flicking lazily, eyes watching the street. "Maybe he is," I said. The bus pulled off, leaving a breeze behind. I looked at the dog again. "You hungry?" That got his attention. He sat up. Not with a bark or a tail wag, just a calm, deliberate rise like he understood the question. I got up slowly, joints aching from sitting in the cold so long. He followed. Just like that. No leash, no hesitation. Like I was the person he'd been waiting for all along. We walked 4 blocks to my house. I half expected him to bolt or turn away at some point. But he kept pace, never running ahead, never falling behind. When I opened my gate, he stepped through like it was routine. Inside, he sniffed around a bit. Found the kitchen, found the couch, found the old slippers my husband used to wear. He nosed them gently, then curled up beside them. That did it. I cried again. I named him Ranger. Don't know why. It just fit. Strong, silent, loyal, like a watchman. Over the next few days, we settled into a rhythm. I bought him a proper bed, though he preferred the rug by the door. I took him to the vet. No chip, no collar, no missing dog reports that matched. It was like he'd walked out of the sky and into my life. But then things got strange. Ranger would bark at certain times. Not often, but always when something was off. Like the day the mailman tripped on my steps and Ranger barked until I came out to help. Or the night I forgot to turn off the stove and he barked until I followed him into the kitchen. He saved me more than once. Little things that could have gone very differently. And one day, he saved me in a way I never expected. But that's not for today. Today is about the bench. About the moment I almost gave up. And the dog who wouldn't let me. Ranger came into my life without a sound. No fanfare. No parade. Just a cold nose, a heavy paw, and a look in his eyes that said, "Not yet." And because of him, I waited. I lived. I let another day happen. I didn't know then how much he would change everything. But I knew enough to get off that bench. To walk home. To open the door to a life I hadn't realized still had room for hope. And Ranger, he stayed by my side, just like he did that day. Watching. Waiting. Guarding something I almost left behind. I was halfway through reheating a can of soup when I saw him staring at the window. Not barking. Not wagging. Just staring. The kind of fixed gaze that makes you stop mid-step and look too, even if you don't know what you're looking for. I turned off the stove, wiping my hands on the towel as I walked over. Outside, the wind was starting to pick up. One of the neighbors' Halloween decorations, a plastic skeleton, was swaying from a tree branch like it had been caught doing something wrong. But there was nothing out of place. No car. No person. Nothing obvious that would explain why Ranger was locked in like that. "You see something, buddy?" I asked. He didn't look at me. Just stayed still. Then came a sound. Low at first, like a hum. Then sharper. A distant screech of tires. And just like that, Ranger turned away from the window and walked into the living room. Maybe that should have clued me in. But I didn't think much of it. Just odd behavior from an odd dog. I went back to the soup, trying to pretend I hadn't just felt a ripple of something pass through the air. Something quiet, but strange. That weekend we started taking walks. Ranger seemed to enjoy them, though he never pulled or barked at squirrels like most dogs did. Instead, he walked like a little old man with a purpose. Head up, steady steps, looking around like he was on patrol. We'd circle the neighborhood twice, past the same row of houses, the same crooked mailbox with the duck stickers, the same parked blue pickup that never seemed to move. Every time we passed the bus stop where I found him, he would pause. Just a second or two. Not long enough to seem dramatic. Just enough to remind me of that day. I started talking more when we walked. About the weather. About what groceries I needed to get. About my husband, if I was feeling strong enough. Ranger never reacted much, but it felt like he was listening. Then came the Monday morning when everything changed again. I was pulling weeds in the front yard, gloves muddy, knees sore, when a boy came running up the sidewalk, maybe 11 or 12, skinny, freckles, hair like wheat. "Hey, that your dog?" he asked, pointing at Ranger, who was sitting on the porch, watching me work. "Sort of," I said. Why? He stopped me from getting hit this morning. I dropped the trowel. What? I was running to catch the bus. I wasn't looking, and this car just came out of nowhere. Your dog barked and knocked me back. Swear to God, lady, I would have been toast. I looked at Ranger, who was now licking one paw like none of this was his business. The boy added, he barked real loud. Never seen a dog move that fast. Then he just trotted away like he didn't want to thank you or anything. You sure it was him? I asked. Yeah, he had that red tag and the grumpy face. I don't think he's grumpy, I said, feeling weirdly defensive. Yeah, but he looks serious, you know? Like a dog with a job. The boy ran off before I could say anything else, backpack bouncing. Later that night, I sat with Ranger on the couch. I was flipping through channels, not really watching anything. Ranger was curled up at the edge, tail tucked neatly around him. You saved that kid, I said. He blinked. No tail wag. No noise. You're not just a stray, are you? Still no response. That's when I started thinking. Not in a tinfoil hat kind of way, but in that quiet part of your brain where you store the things you can't explain. Ranger had shown up when I needed him most. He had barked when the stove was on. He had alerted me to the mailman falling. Now this boy. All saved by a dog who acted less like a pet and more like a silent guard. It was too much to be random. I decided to find out where he came from. The next morning, I posted on the neighborhood Facebook group. Found dog, no chip, beige and cream, very calm. Anyone missing him or recognize this pup? I added a picture of him lounging under the maple tree in the yard. 2 likes. No answers. I called the shelter again, just to double check. Still no matches. I even visited a vet 2 towns over, thinking maybe someone from farther out had lost him. Nothing. He was a ghost. A shaggy, calm ghost with a heart bigger than his paws. And then, 3 days later, a woman came knocking. She was probably in her 70s, neatly dressed, pale green sweater, kind eyes. She introduced herself as Martha. I saw your post, she said. I think that might be the dog that belonged to my son. I stepped aside and let her in. Ranger was in the kitchen, eating kibble. When he saw her, he stood still. Martha didn't rush to pet him. She just looked. His name was Max, she said. My son's dog. He died in a car accident 6 months ago. Max was with him. The responders said he ran off after they tried to pull him from the wreck. My throat tightened. I'm so sorry. She nodded. We looked everywhere. Flyers, online posts. Drove around day and night for a month. But he was gone. Ranger, Max, walked over and sat at her feet. I thought maybe he was gone too, she whispered. But maybe he just needed to find someone who needed him more. I wanted to say something, to offer him back, but I couldn't speak. And she must have sensed it, because she smiled and said, It seems like he's doing good work here, and it's what David would have wanted. He always said Max had a gift. A gift? He just knew things. People's moods, when someone was sick, or when someone was about to fall apart. David used to say Max had a soul too big to be just a dog. We drank tea that afternoon. She told me about her son, how he loved old country music and used to sing off-key in the car, how Max had once pulled him away from a collapsing fence during a storm, how David used to joke that Max was his guardian angel in a fur coat. After she left, I sat with Ranger, Max, and wondered about the things we don't have names for. The reason some animals find us when we need them. The way they fill spaces we didn't know were empty. That night he curled up beside my bed. Not on the floor, not at the door, right next to me. I didn't stop him, and I slept through the night for the first time in a month I didn't know what would come next. But for the first time, I didn't dread the morning, because now I had company. Company that saw more than I did. Company that maybe had saved more lives than I could count. And he was staying. At least, I hoped he was. Max was getting used to his new name again. Ranger or Max, he seemed to respond to both now. But there was a way he tilted his head when I said Max that made something in me settle. I hadn't expected to get attached to that name so quickly. But it felt right. Like calling a part of him home. Fall was sliding into the edges of our days. The leaves had started their change, little bursts of orange and red creeping across the branches lining our street. The air had that crisp smell of old leaves and chimney smoke, and Max had taken to curling beside the fireplace even before I lit it. He seemed to anticipate everything I did now, often waiting at the cabinet before I even thought of grabbing a tea bag or walking to the back porch. He didn't bark much. But every so often he would walk to the front door and sit, ears alert, and I'd peek out to find nothing there. Or so I thought. Once, a stranger lingered too long near my gate, and another time, a car circled the block twice before speeding off. Both times, Max watched but didn't chase. He just stood and waited. Then returned to me when the moment had passed. I started keeping a notebook. Not a journal, exactly. Just little notes, observations. Times he acted a certain way. Places he lingered. People he seemed wary of. I found myself tracking his patterns like some amateur investigator trying to piece together the purpose behind each glance and bark. I don't know what I expected to find, but the habit made me feel connected to him, like I was learning a new language. It was a Thursday afternoon when the knock came. I had just settled into the living room with a paperback and a fresh cup of coffee. Max was asleep near the window, tail twitching in his dreams. A woman stood on the porch, mid-40s, short sandy hair, a red scarf around her neck. Her eyes were scanning the porch, the flower pots, the welcome mat, like she was searching for clues. "Can I help you?" I asked, stepping outside. She looked up, startled. "Sorry, yes. My name's Ellie. I'm trying to track down a dog." My heart jumped. Max had padded up behind me, quiet as a whisper. "He was my brother's," she said. "My brother David. He passed in an accident a while ago. His dog ran off during the crash. I saw a post a few days back in the neighborhood group, and then Martha, our mother, told me she'd visited someone who might have found Max." Max stepped forward and sniffed her hand. His tail gave one soft wag. Just one. "You must be the woman who lives near Red Maple Road," she added. "That's me," I said. She knelt. "Hey, Max. Remember me?" He stood still, nose twitching, then sat. Calm, poised, but watchful. "He's different," she said quietly. "He used to be more anxious. Always worried when David was gone, like he was holding his breath till he came back." I invited her in, and she sat across from me on the couch while Max settled in his usual corner. She told me about how David had once rescued Max from a shelter that was going to close, how Max had bitten through a leash once to chase a toddler away from traffic, how David had said Max had a weird sense of timing, always showing up when someone needed something. We sat there for nearly 2 hours. She cried a little. I did too. Then she looked around, took a sip of water, and said, "You know, I think he was meant to end up with you." "Why?" I asked, wiping my eyes. "Because you needed him," she said. "And he needed someone who'd listen. That was always David's thing. He said Max didn't like people who talked too much, but loved people who spoke when it counted." When she left, I sat on the porch with Max and stared at the clouds. My hand found his fur without thinking, and he leaned into it. It was strange. I had spent weeks trying to distract myself from the ache of being alone. Now, I looked forward to his breath at my side, his weight curled at my feet. I still missed my husband. Of course I did. That grief didn't vanish, but it changed color, softened, and Max had something to do with that. A few days later, I took him to the lake. It was a place we used to visit in the early years, back when weekends meant something. The path was overgrown now, and the dock had seen better days, but the water still shimmered in that deep, still way that made you feel like you could breathe a little better. Max sniffed around, then lay near the edge of the dock, watching a family set up a picnic on the far side. A little boy wandered close to the water's edge, and Max stood, ears forward, not moving but focused. The boy slipped. It happened fast. 1 second he was standing. The next he was sliding down the slope, water grabbing at his shoes. Max barked, loud, sharp, a sound that split the air like thunder. I bolted up. So did the boy's parents. Max took off, his legs kicking up gravel. The boy splashed, gasping. Max was in the water before I could scream. He swam like it was instinct, like he knew exactly how to move. The boy had gone under, but then a ripple, a yelp, and Max had him by the shirt collar, paddling back with steady strokes. The parents met them at the edge, pulled the boy up. He coughed, sputtered, but cried out loud, "The dog! The dog saved me!" I stood there shaking. The father turned to me, stunned. "Is he trained to do that?" I couldn't answer. I didn't know how to explain Max. How could I? That night, Max slept deeply. Wet fur dried, belly full. I watched him from the hallway, just breathing in the fact that he was here. Still here. He had saved a boy he didn't know, again. Just like he saved the one running for the bus. Just like he saved me. My notebook grew thicker. But it wasn't just for recording things anymore. I started writing memories. Notes to my husband. Moments I didn't want to lose. And always, Max was nearby. Not guarding, just being. And somehow, that was enough to make everything feel less heavy. I didn't know where this path with him was going. But for the first time, I didn't feel like I needed to know. Because every morning I woke up, he was there. At the foot of my bed, tail tapping once against the floorboards. Like a heartbeat, like a reason to rise. There was a peculiar stillness in the air that morning, the kind that usually comes after a snowfall. Only there was no snow. Just the filtered gold of early sunlight pushing through the last of the maple leaves. Max was already at the door, tail wagging once, patiently waiting for me to finish tying my shoes. It had become a sort of ritual between us. A morning walk before the rest of the world began to hum. As I reached for the leash, Max tilted his head, then walked to the gate without waiting for me. I hesitated. Leash still in hand. He never ran off, never strayed too far. So I followed him, leash loose in my grip, trusting him. We walked past the bakery, where the scent of fresh bread hung like a promise. We passed the little library box someone had nailed to a tree, still half-stocked with forgotten romance novels and cookbooks. Max stopped at the corner of Cedar and Pine, right where the sidewalk dips unevenly into the road. That was new. He never stopped there. I looked down and noticed a pair of mittens, children's mittens, blue, with little stars stitched on the palms. Max sniffed them once, then looked up at me, then back at the mittens, then the road. "You think someone lost those?" I asked. He sat down, waiting. We stayed there for a few minutes. Then a woman came jogging by, out of breath, glancing around frantically. "Have you seen a pair of blue mittens? My daughter's. We think she dropped them when we crossed. She's losing her mind without them." I pointed to the curb. "These?" She gasped, nodding quickly. "Yes, thank you so much." Max stood, wagged his tail once, then continued down the street. I caught up to him, heart warming from the smallness of the moment. Nothing grand. No life or death urgency. Just a pair of mittens returned. But still, Max had known. We took the long way home. Max seemed in no hurry, pausing occasionally to sniff or glance at something I couldn't see. I started thinking about all the places we hadn't gone yet. Maybe a drive to the coast. Maybe the trail up by Hollow Ridge. Back home, I opened a photo album I hadn't touched in months. My husband and I, younger, sunburned in a beach photo. Us holding fishing poles. Us dancing awkwardly at a wedding. Max came up beside me, rested his chin on my knee. I don't know why, but I found myself talking out loud. He used to laugh when I took pictures of him asleep on the recliner. Called it blackmail. Max blinked up at me, then yawned as if understanding the rhythm of memory. In the afternoon, I invited Ellie over for coffee. I wanted her to see Max again, to talk. I was craving conversation in a way I hadn't before. She brought over a lemon cake, and we sat at the kitchen table while Max lay under it, his head resting on his paws. "He seems good," she said. "At peace. He saved a boy from the lake last week." She smiled, but there was something else behind her eyes. A question. A hesitation. "Do you ever wonder why?" "Why what?" "Why he keeps showing up at the right time. Why he acts the way he does." "Every day. But I've stopped trying to make sense of it. It's easier to just be grateful." "I had a dream about David," she said, her voice soft. In it, he was holding Max's leash, but the leash was glowing, like light, and he said, "He's not done yet." Then he walked away. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just poured us both another cup. The next week brought a shift. It started small. Max stopped eating all of his breakfast. Then he seemed a little slower during our walks. Not in pain, not sick, just tired. I took him to the vet, who ran tests and found nothing urgent. Blood work clean. Vitals normal. "Might just be age catching up with him," the vet said. "He's done a lot. Sometimes dogs like him just feel the weight more." So we rested more, sat on the porch, watched the sky change. He seemed content to just be near me. And I let myself slow down too. One night, there was a storm. The kind that shakes the windows and makes the air taste like metal. Max didn't like thunder, but instead of hiding, he lay beside me on the couch, one paw touching my leg. The power flickered out. I lit candles, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, sat with Max in the dark. That's when it happened. A knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Not at that hour, not in that weather. Max stood. Barked once, then waited. I opened the door to find a girl, maybe 17. Wet. Shaking. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. "I saw your porch light before it went out." I let her in, got her a towel, made tea. She didn't say much, just that there had been yelling, that she had run, that she didn't want to go back. Max lay at her feet, head tilted. "He found me," she whispered. "At the end of the road, just sitting there. He barked, then walked this way." I followed. I said nothing. I just let her sit, let her warm up, let her feel safe. She stayed for a few hours. Then, after the rain stopped, she called a friend. I waited with her on the porch. Max sat between us like a sentry. Before she left, she looked at him and said, "Thank you." He didn't wag his tail, just blinked slowly. I closed the door and leaned against it, my chest full of something I couldn't name. Something big and soft and aching in the best way. That night, I wrote another page in the notebook. He saves people in little ways, not with heroics, not with stunts, with presence, with timing, with knowing when someone needs just a little more time to decide to keep going. And somehow they always do. So did I. And Max? He just keeps showing up. The air smelled different that morning, like frost and dry leaves and something else I couldn't quite place. Max had gotten up before me, which was rare. Usually I'd find him curled by the foot of the bed, head resting on his paws, eyes fluttering open the moment I stirred. But that morning, he was already in the living room, sitting in front of the front door like he was expecting someone. I stood in the hallway, watching him for a moment. He didn't move until I walked in. Then he turned his head and looked at me. One blink. That was it. "Let me guess," I said. "We're not doing breakfast until we go out?" He got up and padded to the door. It wasn't even 6 yet, but I pulled on my coat and scarf and followed him out. The streets were empty. A fine mist still hanging low to the ground, and Max led the way without hesitation. He turned left at the corner, which wasn't unusual, but then took another left we never used, down a quieter street with fewer houses and more trees. I kept up, wondering where we were going. He wasn't in a hurry, just sure. Every step of his felt deliberate. We came to a small house I didn't recognize. Pale yellow, a wooden swing on the porch, paint chipping near the windows. Max stopped at the bottom of the steps. He sat. Waited. I stood beside him, unsure. Then I heard it. A soft thud. Then another. From inside. "Hello?" I called out. "Is anyone there?" No answer. Just silence, and that soft thudding again. I climbed the steps slowly, knocked on the door. Nothing. I looked at Max. "Do we go in?" His ears perked. He stood. The door wasn't locked. It creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was still. A faint smell of something burned out and old, like scorched soup left on the stove too long. The living room was empty. Then I heard it again, coming from a back room. I called out one more time. That's when I heard the moan. I rushed forward, Max right beside me. In a small bedroom off the hallway, an older man was lying half off the bed, his skin pale, his breathing shallow. I knelt beside him. "Sir, can you hear me?" He blinked. Barely. I called 911. The operator stayed on with me until the ambulance arrived. Max didn't leave the man's side the entire time, not even when the EMTs came rushing in. They worked quickly, lifting him gently, checking vitals, giving instructions to one another. One of them turned to me. "You found him?" I nodded. "My dog brought me here." The EMT looked at Max, then back at me, eyes wide. "He's lucky. A couple more hours and, well, let's just say he owes that dog big." They left with the man. I stood outside, Max beside me, The morning now fully bright, the mist burned away by light. I didn't know the man. I didn't know why Max had picked that house, but I didn't question it anymore. Back home, I gave Max extra breakfast. He ate slowly, then sat on the back porch watching birds gather around the feeder. Later that day, Ellie called. She had a photo she wanted to bring over, something she'd found going through old boxes at her mom's place. When she arrived, she was quiet. She handed me a faded picture. Max was in it, younger, leaner, sitting beside a little girl I didn't recognize. "That's David's friend's daughter," Ellie said. "She had a seizure once while they were babysitting. Max alerted David before it even started. They said it was the only reason she didn't fall off the porch." I studied the picture. Max's eyes looked the same. Deep, aware, that same patience. Ellie sighed. "He's been doing this a long time." We didn't talk much after that. Just sat on the porch drinking cider, Max lying at our feet, his ears flicking at every distant sound. The next few days were quiet. Peaceful, even. Max seemed to enjoy the slowness. He'd nap in the afternoon sun, follow me from room to room, and occasionally stop to rest his head on my lap. I received a letter from the hospital. The man we'd found was stable. He had a daughter, they wrote, who had been trying to reach him for days. They included her number. I called her that evening. She was breathless with gratitude. Told me she'd been on a business trip, hadn't been able to reach him, and assumed he was just avoiding her calls like he sometimes did. She asked if she could visit to meet me, and the dog who saved her father. When she came, she brought flowers and a card. She sat in the living room with Max, petting his head gently. "You saved his life," she whispered. Max looked at her, then stood and went to lie down in the hallway. His work done. For now. I walked her to her car. She thanked me again, eyes misting. Back inside, I found Max sitting by the fireplace, watching the flames. I joined him on the floor, resting against the wall. "Are you an angel?" I asked quietly. He didn't move, but I felt something shift. Not in the air. In me. I had stopped needing to understand him, stopped questioning how or why. It didn't matter, because he was here. He chose to be here. And somehow, every day he stayed, the world made a little more sense. Max began waking me up earlier. Not in a noisy way, never with barking or pacing. He would just sit beside the bed, watching until I opened my eyes. The first time it happened, I assumed I'd left something on, maybe the oven or the porch light. But everything was as it should be. He just seemed to want me up. I followed his lead. At first, our walks felt the same. Same path, same quiet streets. But then he began taking turns I didn't expect. Down streets I hadn't walked since my husband passed. Past houses I hadn't noticed in years. And at every unexpected detour, something happened. One morning, we passed the old community center, long closed, its windows dusty, its doors chained. Max stopped outside and refused to budge. I waited. A few minutes passed before I saw a woman with two small boys approaching. One of the boys held a basketball. "Are they open again?" she asked, squinting at the building. "Not that I know of," I said. She looked tired. Her hair was tied back hastily, dark circles under her eyes. "It's the only place I remembered where they could run around. They've been going stir-crazy." I didn't know what to say. Then I looked down and saw Max sitting at the door, staring through the glass. The woman followed my gaze. "He knows this place?" "I don't think so," she sighed. "I used to bring my brothers here when they were little. Must have been 15 years ago. We'd spend hours in the rec room." I looked at the chain on the door, then at the windows. "If you wait here, I'll see if the town office still has a key. I know someone who works there." She smiled faintly. "Really?" I nodded. "It won't hurt to ask." Max wagged his tail. 3 days later, the community center was temporarily opened on Saturdays. I wasn't sure what magic Max had in those paws of his, but he always seemed to land where he was needed. Later that week, Max and I sat on a bench outside the library. He liked watching the kids run in and out, their backpacks bouncing, laughter trailing like streamers. One little girl walked up to him, eyes wide. "Can I pet him?" I nodded. "Of course." She stroked his head gently, her fingers tiny against his thick fur. He's soft, like a stuffed animal, but warmer. Her dad came over and smiled, thanking me. I said nothing. I never really felt like Max belonged to me, not in the traditional sense. He was his own force, his own compass. I was just lucky enough to be traveling in the same direction for a while. The next morning, Max wouldn't let me go out without carrying a scarf. It was too warm for one, and I argued out loud about it, but he blocked the door until I went back inside and grabbed it. 2 hours later, the breeze picked up, and I wrapped it around my neck, grateful. He was always like that. One step ahead. Then there was the day of the phone call. It was from Martha. "I wanted to ask if Max could visit David's old house with me," she said. I didn't hesitate. When we arrived, the house was just as I remembered from the photos. Blue siding, white trim, a wind chime hanging by the porch, barely moving. Martha opened the door slowly. "I haven't been in here since, well, you know." Max entered first, walked through each room like he'd never left it, sniffed the corners, paused at the fireplace, then sat in front of a picture on the mantel. David and Max, standing on a hiking trail, both looking into the distance. Martha covered her mouth. "He used to stare at that photo for hours," she whispered, said it made him feel steady. Max stayed in that spot, while she wandered through the house, touching familiar things. She cried, sometimes silently, sometimes with shaking shoulders, and through it all, Max remained close. Watching. Listening. On the way out, Martha looked at me. "I think I'm ready to let the house go, and I think he's the reason why." A few days later, we visited a school. Ellie had arranged for me to talk to a small group of children about kindness, not because I was an expert, but because the town had heard about Max. Word travels fast. The classroom was warm and colorful, filled with drawings and alphabet charts. The kids sat cross-legged on the rug, while I stood in front with Max. "He's not a superhero," I said. "He doesn't fly or wear a cape. He just listens. He shows up. He notices things, and sometimes that's all it takes to make a difference." A boy in the front row raised his hand. "Can he talk?" I smiled. "Not with words, but he talks all the time, in his own way." "What's he saying now?" I looked down at Max. He was looking at the kids, calm and still. He's saying this is exactly where he wants to be. The teacher thanked me afterward, her eyes wet. She bent down to pet Max and whispered something I didn't catch, but he leaned into her hand. Later, on our walk home, Max seemed lighter. He had a little bounce in his step, like those kids had given him something he hadn't realized he needed. That night, I sat with my notebook, wrote everything down, every place, every face, every moment that Max had turned ordinary into unforgettable. He was aging, I could tell. His steps were a bit slower. He slept a little more deeply, but he still had that light, that way of knowing where to go, of helping people see what they couldn't. And each day I spent with him, I found myself becoming more like him, a little quieter, a little more present, a little more open to the small, beautiful things that pass us by too easily. Max didn't speak. He didn't need to, because every look, every choice, every pause said everything. The first time Max refused to go any farther down Elm Street, I thought he just didn't like the smell of something. Maybe a garbage can had been tipped over, or there was a sound I couldn't hear. He planted his paws, didn't growl or bark, just turned around and nudged my leg gently. So, we changed direction. But the second time, 3 days later, he did the same thing. And this time, he wouldn't even look at the street, just stood still until I gave up trying to coax him. He was guiding me away from something, and I didn't question it. Not anymore. Instead, we headed toward the edge of town, past the trail that led down by the river. It was colder now, and the leaves had all but vanished from the trees, carpeting the path in yellows and browns. Max walked slower than usual, but his tail swayed gently as he sniffed the air, ears twitching every now and then. As we reached the overlook where the town dropped away into a quilt of rooftops and fields, I noticed someone standing by the wooden railing. A man in his 30s, maybe early 40s, holding a small box. Max didn't stop walking. He went straight toward the man, then sat beside him without hesitation. The man glanced down and gave a soft chuckle. "Hey there, buddy." I caught up, unsure if I should interrupt. He looked over at me and nodded. "Is he yours?" "He picked me," I said, unsure how else to explain it. The man smiled faintly. "He's got that look, like he knows things." We stood there a moment, just looking out. "I was going to scatter her ashes today," he said suddenly. "Right here. This was our spot. Mine and my sister's. She always said the view made her feel brave." I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. Max leaned slightly against the man's leg. "She died last month," he said. "And I've been putting this off. Didn't feel right. Didn't feel like she was ready." He opened the box slowly, hands trembling a little. Then he looked at Max. "But I think maybe now she is." The breeze shifted just then, as if responding. The man knelt down, whispered something to the box, and released the ashes. They swirled gently, caught in the wind, before floating off toward the trees. When it was done, he looked at Max again. "Thank you." He stood, wiped his face, nodded to me, and left without another word. Max turned and nudged me gently back toward the trail. Our work there was done. That night I sat with him by the fireplace again. I held a cup of tea I hadn't sipped, thinking about how many people Max had helped without saying a word. The next day I brought him to the local shop to get a new collar. His old one was fine, but something about it felt too worn, too faded. He deserved something special. We picked out a deep green one, soft but sturdy. The clerk offered to emboss his name on the tag. "What's his full name?" she asked. I looked at Max. He blinked slowly. "Max," I said. "Just Max," she smiled. "Strong name." The tag glinted in the sun as we walked back home, and Max's tail wagged lightly every few steps. It was almost like he knew he'd earned it. A few days later, the town held a small fall festival, the kind with hay rides, apple cider, and booths selling handmade soap and quilts. I brought Max with me, not sure how he'd handle the noise and crowds. But he took it all in stride. Kids flocked to him. Old men tipped their hats. One woman even knelt to whisper in his ear. I couldn't hear what she said, but she was crying when she stood. "He was there," she told me, "at the bus stop, the day I almost gave up. He didn't come with me, but he sat with me until I stood up." I swallowed hard. "He does that." She touched my arm. "He's not just a dog." I nodded. "I know." Max stayed close the rest of the afternoon. I bought him a tiny pumpkin cookie from a vendor who insisted it was safe for dogs. He ate it slowly, savoring every bite. We sat near the bandstand as the sun went down, the lights from the booths glowing soft gold across the grass. Max rested his head on my shoe. That evening, as I brushed him out, I found a few more gray hairs along his muzzle. He was getting older, slower. But his eyes were still bright, still full of that knowing look that said he wasn't done yet. That night, I had a dream. I was standing on the same overlook where we'd met the man with the box. Max was beside me, but in the dream, he was glowing faintly. Not in a way that felt unnatural. It was soft, comforting, like moonlight. In the dream, I turned to him and said, "Are you going to leave me?" He didn't answer, but he leaned his head against my leg. I woke up with tears in my eyes. Max was in the same spot he always was, by the foot of the bed, breathing slow, peaceful. I didn't know what the dream meant, but I didn't try to analyze it. I just wrote it down in the notebook, like I had with everything else. Later that week, we visited the farmer's market. On the way home, a man shouted from a porch across the street. I didn't recognize him at first, but then I realized he was the father of the boy Max had pulled from the lake months ago. "We got a new dog," he said, smiling. "But my son still talks about yours like he's some kind of legend." Max wagged his tail once, politely. "You changed his life," the man said. "Changed all of ours." I didn't say anything. I just gave a quiet nod. Max was more than a legend. But legends stay. Legends endure. And I still had more pages left to write in the notebook. The first snow came earlier than usual that year. Not a heavy blanket, but just enough to dust the rooftops and frost the grass. I opened the curtains that morning to see the world softened into white, and behind me I heard Max's claws clicking softly against the hardwood as he approached. He stared out the window with me, his ears twitching as if he could hear each snowflake landing. "You ready for winter, old boy?" I asked. His only answer was to rest his head against my leg. I scratched behind his ear, and we stood there together, watching as a pair of kids from across the street chased each other with mittened hands and laughter that steamed in the cold. We bundled up and went for our walk a little later than usual. Max's pace was measured, but he didn't seem to mind the cold. He trotted ahead slightly, then stopped at the corner, waiting for me like always. I noticed his footprints in the snow, distinct, sturdy, side by side with mine. There was something about seeing them together like that hit me in the chest. We took our usual loop, but Max made one of his sudden decisions and veered off toward the edge of the neighborhood. We hadn't walked this street since early autumn. It was quiet here, lined with houses built in the 50s, yards still decorated with the remains of Halloween and hints of Christmas. He stopped outside a modest brick house with a sagging fence and a metal mailbox shaped like a trout. A woman sat on the porch steps, bundled in a thick coat, face buried in her hands. Max walked up to her and sat. I hesitated, unsure if we were intruding. But before I could call him back, she looked up. Her face was red from crying, eyes puffy. "He yours?" she asked, voice raspy. I nodded. "Sort of. He finds who he wants." She wiped her face with the sleeve of her coat. He's got good timing. I stepped closer. You okay? She let out a shaky laugh. My brother passed last night. I'm the one who had to call everyone, plan the service. It didn't hit me until this morning. Then I just came out here and didn't want to go back in. Max lay down beside her, resting his chin on her foot. She looked down. He reminds me of our old dog, Spud. Used to sit with me when I was upset. Same eyes. We talked for a little while. Just enough. She didn't need solutions, only company. Max stayed there the whole time, like a stone pillar, unmoving except for the occasional shift of his ears when a car passed. When she was ready, she stood and thanked us. She didn't ask for our names, and I didn't offer. Some meetings don't need to be remembered with words, only with presence. The snow thickened as we walked back. Max shook his coat, and I laughed, brushing flakes from his back. When we got home, I toweled him off and lit a fire. He curled up on his rug, nose tucked beneath his tail. That evening, I received a letter from the school. One of the kids from our visit had written to Max. It said, "Dear Max, you are the best dog ever. I had a bad day before you came, and when you let me pet you, it made my heart happy again. I hope you come back. Thank you for saving people. Love, Eli." I read it aloud to Max. He blinked, and I pinned it to the corkboard in the kitchen. Later, I sat with the notebook again, flipping through the pages. I had started including drawings now. Simple sketches of places we'd visited, of Max lying by the fire, of the way his ears flopped when he ran. The notebook was nearly full. The next morning, Max surprised me by bringing me one of my shoes. Not in a playful way. He placed it at my feet and waited. "You want to go somewhere?" He turned toward the door. We walked all the way to the park near the old train tracks. It had been closed for maintenance for weeks, but now the yellow barriers were gone. Max walked straight in. We reached the bridge where the trail looped back, and there, on a bench dusted with snow, sat an elderly man feeding birds with cracked sunflower seeds from his palm. Max approached him like they were old friends. The man looked down, then up at me. "Your dog?" "In a way. He's got the eyes of someone who's seen things." We sat with him for a while. He talked about his wife, how she'd passed 2 years ago, how he still came to the park every week because they used to feed birds together. "She always said someone would keep me company when she couldn't," he said. Max laid his head on the man's knee. I guess she was right. On the way home, I looked over at Max. He wasn't panting, wasn't smiling like he sometimes did after a job well done. He was quiet. Still. But there was something in his eyes that felt like contentment. Back at the house, I made tea and left his bowl full of his favorite. He ate slowly, then walked into the hallway and lay down on the cool floor, paws tucked beneath him like always. The next few days were uneventful. Cold mornings, quiet walks. Max seemed to enjoy the slowness. He napped more, but every time I stood up, he followed me. Every time I sat down, he joined me. I didn't think about the passing time. I just let the days be what they were. Max was still here, still watching, still guiding. And I kept walking, step by step, beside him. The wind had picked up overnight. By morning, it was the kind of biting cold that made you second-guess even looking out the window. But Max was already at the door, his new green collar shining faintly in the pale light. He didn't bark or whine. Just sat, waiting, eyes fixed on the knob like he could open it himself if I took too long. "All right," I muttered, pulling on 2 layers of socks and my thickest coat. "But this one better be short." He led me along the main road, where most houses were still asleep and windows frosted from the inside. I kept my hands buried in my pockets, watching my breath puff out in clouds, following the sound of Max's paws crunching against the salted pavement. But then he stopped. Not abruptly, not startled, just like he always did when he had something in mind. We were in front of an old corner store that had been closed for at least a year. The windows were papered over, but there was a light on inside. I tilted my head, confused. Someone finally reopened this place? Max turned his head slowly, then stared at the door. I was about to say something else when I noticed a girl, couldn't have been older than 16, sitting on the step just beside the door. Thin coat, no gloves, no hat. She looked up as we approached, eyes red from crying. "Hi," she said, voice cracking. Max walked to her and sat down, close enough to share warmth. She hesitated, then reached out to touch his back. "You okay?" I asked, kneeling beside them. "I missed the bus. My mom's gonna kill me. I didn't mean to stay out so late. She broke off. Max leaned against her. "It's all right," I said. "You need a phone to call someone?" She nodded. I handed her mine, and she dialed with shaking fingers. The call was brief. She didn't say much, just that she was safe and where to pick her up. When she hung up, she didn't move. "He found me," she said softly, petting Max again. "I was just sitting here, freezing and stupid. He walked up and sat next to me like it was normal." "He does that," I said. Her mom came 10 minutes later. Tearful, angry at first, but grateful. She hugged me, hugged Max. Then they drove off. We walked back slowly. I stopped by the cafe and picked up a muffin for myself and a small bacon treat for Max. He sniffed it with interest, but waited until we got home to eat. Later that day, I started sorting through the attic, something I'd been meaning to do for months. I found boxes of old decorations, mismatched photo albums, dusty board games we hadn't played in years. Max climbed the stairs carefully, one paw at a time. When he reached me, he lay down in the corner where the sun broke through a tiny window. I worked while he watched. I pulled out a dusty box labeled Winter in thick black marker. Inside were scarves, old flannel, and a stack of handmade Christmas cards. One had a paw print stamped in red ink. My heart squeezed. I brought it downstairs and added it to the notebook. The next few days were filled with quiet routines. Max had stopped pulling ahead on walks. He lingered more. Seemed content to sit in the park or on the front steps, watching the wind push leaves across the sidewalk. Ellie called to ask if Max would be part of the town's holiday fundraiser, just a small event at the community center. Photos with dogs, caroling, cookies. She said the kids had asked if the angel dog would come. When we arrived, Max walked calmly into the room like it was his job. Kids gathered in a wide circle, waiting their turn. Some were shy, some loud. He responded to each one the same, with stillness, gentleness, focus. One boy hugged him around the neck and whispered something. I didn't hear it, but I saw Max's tail flick once. After the event, Ellie helped me carry home a gift basket someone had left for Max. Inside were biscuits, a soft blanket, and a tag engraved with the words, "Thank you, Max." That night, I spread the new blanket out beside the fireplace. Max sniffed it, circled once, and lay down with a quiet sigh. I sat beside him, rubbing his side slowly. "You've had a big year, haven't you?" I whispered. He didn't open his eyes, just leaned his head against my knee. The next morning, the wind was harsh, but the sky was bright. We walked to the edge of town where the old railway bridge crossed a shallow creek. Max paused halfway, nose lifted. A man was there, standing alone at the far end, middle-aged, nervous. He didn't notice us at first. Max approached slowly, then sat 10 feet away. The man looked down, startled. "You alone too?" he asked. His voice cracked. He looked like someone who hadn't slept. I walked closer, keeping quiet. "My wife died last summer," he said without prompting. "Since then, it's just been quiet. Too quiet. I came here today because I don't know what to do next." Max scooted closer. The man looked at him. Really looked. "I had a dog once," he whispered. "Used to walk with me here. Sat in this same spot." We stayed for nearly half an hour. No speeches, no advice. Just being there. The man finally stood up, thanked us, and walked off with more steadiness than before. Max didn't move until the man had disappeared around the bend. That evening, I saw Max dreaming again. His legs twitched, his nose wrinkled. I wondered if he dreamed about all the people he'd met, all the places he'd helped bring back to life. I stroked his back and whispered, "You found me too." In the morning, I brewed 2 cups of tea like usual. One for me, one I poured into a shallow bowl for Max to sniff, which he always did before walking away in approval. He followed me to the porch, and we sat together, watching as the town stretched and yawned beneath a pale sun. He didn't need to save anyone today. And still, just sitting beside me, it felt like he was doing exactly what he was meant to. Not everything had to be dramatic. Sometimes, peace was enough. A shared silence. A breath of cold air. A dog beside you that carried the weight of something bigger than you could name. And as long as Max was there, I knew I was exactly where I needed to be. Max woke me up with a soft nudge to the side of my arm. It was still early, barely any light slipping through the curtains, but something in his gaze said we needed to move. I sat up slowly, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, and reached for my sweater. "You already beat the sun," I said. He waited at the door, not pacing, not anxious, just patient, purposeful. Outside, the air was sharp and clean. The sky was brushed with that soft silver you only see in the moments just before dawn. Max took the lead, like always. His paws made quiet prints in the frost-dusted sidewalk. We passed the diner, the library, the tiny park where he once barked until a lost toddler was found. But he didn't stop anywhere. Instead, he led me past the edge of town, to the road that dipped down toward the lake. We hadn't been there in weeks. The trail was frozen, but clear. I followed him to the dock where we'd sat once, months ago. The water below was half iced, reflecting the sky. He walked to the edge and stood still. Then, slowly, he turned and came back to sit beside me on the bench. No urgency, no distractions, just him and me, looking out. "You've been thinking about this, haven't you?" I said. He rested his head against my leg. We stayed like that for a long time. The sun rose slowly, casting golden light across the frozen lake. I didn't cry, I didn't speak, I just breathed with him, matched his stillness. When we finally got up to go home, he walked slower than usual. I matched his pace. That afternoon, Ellie stopped by with a casserole and a book she thought I'd like. Max greeted her at the door with a tired but happy glance, his tail thudding once against the floor. She knelt down and kissed the top of his head. "He's quieter today," she said. I nodded. He's had a long journey. She sat with us a while, talked about her mom, about David, about the way Max had helped them all heal without ever saying a word. When she left, she hugged me tightly and said, "You've both given this town something it didn't know it needed." That night, Max curled up near the fireplace without needing to be called. I laid the new blanket beside him, the one the kids gave us. He looked up at me once, then closed his eyes. I stayed beside him until the fire went out. The next morning, he didn't wake me up. He was lying in his usual spot. Still, peaceful. His chest rising and falling with soft, steady breaths. But he didn't open his eyes. I sat with him, held his paw, told him about the day ahead, about how the frost had melted early, about the birds that were starting to return. He didn't move, but he didn't need to. Later, I took out the notebook, the one that had started with little notes, then sketches, then memories. I filled one more page. Max spent the day sleeping. I kept checking on him, brushing his fur, whispering old stories into the air. That evening, just before the sun dipped below the trees, he took one final breath, long and quiet, and he didn't take another. I didn't cry at first. I just sat with him. The house was quiet. The world outside, still. Then I wrapped him in the soft blanket, the one from the children, the one that smelled like cookies and snow. I buried him beneath the maple tree in the yard, the one he always stopped at to sniff the wind. I placed the notebook beside him, tucked into a waterproof sleeve. A record of a life not owned but shared, a story not written by me, but by every person he'd helped. A few days passed in silence. But then the letters began. From parents, from teachers, from strangers, notes left on my porch, emails from across the state, stories of a dog who had appeared at just the right time, who had kept people company when they didn't know they needed it, who had sat beside grief without asking anything in return. I started a scrapbook. I filled it with their words, their drawings, their memories of Max. One child sent a picture of an angel with 4 legs and a tail. The caption said, "He's still watching." I don't know if dogs go somewhere, but I do know that Max stayed long enough to make sure I was okay. To make sure we all were. I still walk the town each morning. I still leave the door cracked, like I'm expecting him to nudge it open. I still glance at the foot of the bed when I wake up. And every now and then, when the wind shifts just right, I feel him beside me. Not like a memory, not like a shadow, like a presence. Still guiding, still watching, still home. The town changed after Max passed, though maybe not in ways you'd expect. It wasn't a grand gesture, no statue, no mural, but something in the rhythm of the place grew gentler. People slowed down. They stopped to say hello more often, left food at the community pantry without signing their names, planted flowers by the old bus stop where he was first found. The librarian started a reading program for children on weekends and named it Max's Corner. She kept a plush toy dog on the chair beside her, and kids would pet it as they listened to stories. She told me once that kids who never sat still before now stayed through the whole book, their little hands resting on the stuffed dog's back. The man from the bridge wrote a letter that got published in the town paper. It was titled, "What a Dog Taught Me About Staying." He never named Max, but everyone knew who he meant. It ended with the words, "Sometimes the thing that saves you doesn't say a word." Ellie and I grew closer. We started having lunch every Tuesday, and after a few months, she invited me to join a small support group for people who'd lost someone. I went once, nervous, I stayed because of the way people talked about their losses, like open doors rather than locked rooms. And at every session, I talked about Max, about his timing, about his stillness, about how, somehow, he always knew when someone was standing at the edge. One spring afternoon, I was walking near the lake when a child ran up to me. She had curly blonde hair and a crayon drawing folded tightly in her hand. "Did you know the angel dog?" she asked. I nodded. "Very well." She opened her drawing. It was a picture of Max sitting beside a person holding a balloon. She pointed at the balloon. "That's me. I was sad once, but he made me feel okay again." I crouched down and said, "He was really good at that." She nodded seriously, then ran back to her parents. Back home, I added the drawing to the scrapbook. I sometimes think Max wasn't here just to help people through their worst moments. He reminded us of what it meant to be quietly present, to show up, to sit in the silence without trying to fix it. Even now, I keep a spot by the door clear, just in case. Sometimes at night, when the wind hums through the trees and the world feels a little too big, I pull out the notebook. I reread his story, our story, the lives that brushed up against his, the quiet echoes of a dog who never asked for anything but gave everything. And I believe truly that somewhere just beyond my reach, Max is still walking, still watching, still waiting for the next soul who needs someone to sit beside them until they can stand again.